Welcome to today's Global Connections program. I'm Bill Miller. Why is New York City called the international capital of the world? What is the Mayor's Office of International Affairs doing to focus attention and the spotlight on organizations such as the United Nations and other international groups? My guest today is going to bring us up to date on this very important operation. My guest today is Commissioner Penny Abeywardena. Ms. Abeywardena is the Commissioner of Mayor Bill de Blasio's Office for International Affairs.
Indeed.
Previously, she was the Director of Girls and Women Integration at the Clinton Global Initiative. Madam Commissioner, welcome to today's Global Connections program.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
I appreciate you being with me. We did this about 2 years ago, a little over 2 years ago when you just walked in the door, I believe.
That's right,
so
yes.
A lot has transpired in 2 years, but let's talk about your office, the Office for International Affairs. Just basically, what is the purpose, the mission of your office?
Absolutely. I don't think many people are aware, but New York City is host to the largest diplomatic corps in the world. So we not only host the UN headquarters, affiliates, but 193 permanent missions, 114 consulates, and about 70 trade commissions. So my office is there to serve the diplomatic community. And, you know, it's New York City. So we take a lot of pleasure and pride in the relationship that we have with the global community.
And it certainly is a large community and a very important community too.
Yes, absolutely.
And our viewers can go to your website at www.nyc.gov/international to get much more information about what you're doing.
That's right. You can just Google the Mayor's Office for International Affairs. We're one of the few in the world, so it's right there.
Lots of ways to get to it.
Yes.
Exactly right.
Indeed.
Well, let's talk about this international capital of the world.
Yes.
And why are we there? Why, you mentioned the various delegations that are here, but the United Nations is here also.
Absolutely.
And that the UN, I think a lot of people are surprised to find out that UN is really the epicenter of the world. Every issue that's being discussed, it doesn't matter, climate change, human rights, whatever, some group at the UN, or more than one group perhaps, will be talking about these issues.
That's right. And New York City is very aware of that. Not only do we host the UN, and again, the affiliates, and also all the international NGOs that are based out here. We also, one in every 3 New Yorkers is born in another country. We are proud to host more languages around our 5 boroughs than there are at the United Nations. But hosting the UN really makes New York City the international capital of the world, and that's something we take very seriously, and we honor it with the different partnerships we have, especially around the cultural and educational resource that the UN is. But it was very important for me, as you mentioned, I'm actually about to hit my 3-year anniversary in this role, and one of the big sort of gaps for me in coming in was that we hadn't, as a city, really reflected on the economic impact of the UN in New York City. So one of the first things I commissioned was an economic impact analysis of the UN. This is our impact report that we published last fall. And I think there are a few highlights that I'd like to point out because this is pretty extraordinary.
Sure, please do.
In 2014, 3.69 billion in total output was estimated in terms of what the UN community contributed to New York City's economy. Approximately about 25,000 full and part-time jobs in New York City are because of the presence of the UN community. This UN community directly employs 16,000 people who are taking home estimated household earnings of 1.64 billion, and that's money that's being spent in our neighborhoods in our 5 boroughs. Some other highlights are that we have about 30,000 people that come in and get accredited to participate in the UN. Again, more people that are participating in our economy. And I will say, you know, the UN General Assembly, that's a time where there's a lot of traffic in New York City, but something that Mayor de Blasio and I think it's very important for us to remind people this is traffic that's also in our bodegas and in our dry cleaners. And, you know, these are really impacting the way that New York City is benefiting. I want to say the other piece around this impact analysis that we did is that we incur quite a cost in, you know, hosting the UN, and we take that very seriously. And so this economic impact analysis, which you can find on our website, really highlights that synergetic relationship between between New York City and the UN from an economic perspective. And again, this is just one piece of that relationship.
Do you have a ballpark figure of how much it costs to provide protective services, that type of thing, to make sure the diplomats are safe, that they don't have terrorists attacking the UN, that type of?
Absolutely. Part of one of the findings in this is that New York City incurs costs approximately about $54 million, and this includes the security issues, but this also takes into consideration education of children of UN staff, and then even costs related to my office.
That is really very minor in comparison to the economic spinoff. You talk about 3.6 billion,
that's true.
Not million. You're talking about million as far as protective services and that, police protection, what have you.
Absolutely. It's just important that we show the synergistic relationship. New York City is invested in hosting the UN here.
And of course, not only is it the financial economic spinoff,
Right.
you've got this ripple effect that takes place from money spent, but it's also very prestigious to have the only international organization brings all the countries of the world together under one roof in your city.
I agree. It is something we are very happy.
We put that on a bumper sticker.
I would put that on my car.
There you go.
That is actually something we are very aware of. But I also think that New York City is the only place that annually is able to host the UN General Assembly. In 2015, when the Pope came, we not only had him, we had about 150 heads of government and state. And while there is a lot of traffic, we seem to do it seamlessly and safely every year, and it's something that we take as a city very seriously.
And of course, when we look at the United Nations, there have been studies that have been done in the past. Yours, I'm sure, didn't go this far because this is not under your particular rubric or your particular area of interest, but there have been studies that have shown that the United States benefits is one of the major beneficiaries of the United Nations, and one of the reasons is because you mentioned about the $3.6 billion, the fact that this is the international capital of the world. But when you look at the United Nations just across the board, you look at the services that people in the United States and people around the world receive, we often forget that it's the UN agencies that help our airlines to fly internationally, to fly safely, that help to keep the ships on high seas from crashing into one another, or they have minimal safety requirements. You have UN agencies that help move mail, weather information around the world, just on across the board, services that touch our lives every day. And of course, the American public, U.S. public, is like 45% of the flying international traffic. And so our folks actually benefit more, but every country in the world benefits from the UN, and even though the UN is not a perfect organization, and people of the UN will tell you that, but the point is it's indispensable, and that's what I think we have to keep in mind. Well, what are some of the other programs that you have that are reaching out to the community or deal with the international community?
Well, I think what you just said about the UN being indispensable. So in 2015, the global community came together around the Sustainable Development Goals, which we like to think of as global goals, here in New York City. And in that same year, Mayor de Blasio put out our vision for development, really looking at equity and sustainability and resilience in New York City. And so one of the real focuses of my office had been, how do we take this incredible resources, having the UN here, having the member states here, and then looking at the leadership that we have in New York City, and how can we, with that equity lens, there were such synergies between the Sustainable Development Goals and our One NYC vision. And so we created a program called Global Vision Urban Action. We actively do programs around this where we're sharing best practices between what New York City is doing, but within UN experts, member states, what best practices they have to share. And it's about creating this collaborative work environment. How are we talking to each other? Because one thing that I think is important to remember about New York City is that we are as large as 110, if not larger than 110 countries, right? New York City is very unique in that sense, but we also have to show up with the humility because we're not just Manhattan. There are things around our city that we can learn from Nairobi, we can learn from Sao Paulo, follow. And so creating those opportunities to exchange best practices has been one of the richest programs that's been coming out from a substantive issue-based perspective. And we've been able to bring together topical conversations around mental health, around women's economic empowerment. We just did an event at the UN during CSW. And so these are opportunities for us to not only work with member states, the UN, but partner with UN Women, World Health Organization, UNICEF. And so that's been a really rich experience. The other piece that has been very important is how do we engage youth? We have a program called New York City Junior Ambassadors, where we ask educators around the city to think about how can you integrate sustainable development goals, these global goals, in your curriculum. And the winning classrooms, we select 20 classrooms every year. We're 2 years into the program. We just launched our third year. We've impacted about 1,000 kids. These kids come to the UN, get a curated tour. Let's say it's around climate action or human trafficking. Then they get to meet with a UN expert, have a dynamic conversation. Then an ambassador goes out to their school. That's been an important part of Mayor de Blasio's vision for this office, is how do we get this diplomatic community more engaged with our neighborhoods, right? And that's just not Turtle Bay, that's Staten Island, that's the South Bronx, that's East New York. And I have to say, Matthew Rycroft, the ambassador to the UK, he's been to Staten Island. Laura Flores, the ambassador to Panama, she's been to a couple of schools in Queens and the Bronx. And so it has just been a very exciting opportunity to get young people thinking about global issues, and then having them come into their neighborhoods and activate and do a commitment or a project in their community. But this is how we're also investing in global citizens. So the UN is a partner fully in terms of exchanging best practices at the expert level, but also engaging our young people in how to be global citizens.
Which is very important.
Absolutely.
We are all global citizens. We're citizens of a country, residents
more
of a
important
state.
Now than ever, I would say.
More important now than
yes.
ever. That's quite right. Yes. You were talking about youth, and they are so critical. Obviously, tomorrow they'll be more critical maybe than they are today, but they're still very valuable.
Absolutely.
To move any country forward. Are you involved in anything such as a Model United Nations program? Those have been very popular over the years, where the youth come together. And
as far as I know, they're running really well. I actively participate, and when they have their events either at the UN or nearby, we always try to welcome their participation. The UN Foundation is a very close partner of ours, and they have been a key partner in our Junior Ambassador program.
That is very important.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, you're watching Global Connections Television, which is a privately funded, independently produced program. The opinions expressed on Global Connections are solely those of the moderator and his guest. We would invite our viewers to go to our website at www.globalconnectionstelevision.com to view previous programs. Also, if you're involved with any type of media outlet, be it a PBS or community access television station, or perhaps you're involved with an educational institution that has an intra-campus hookup, or you just have a website and you think our programs are interesting and you would like to share them with other people, please feel free to do so. Global Connections Television is provided free of charge as a public service to help people better understand international issues and how they impact our lives. Today we're talking with Commissioner Penny Abeywardena, who works with Mayor de Blasio in the Office of International Affairs, and talking about why New York City is the international capital of the world. Commissioner, we are well into it now,
yes.
And we're talking about these programs that you have launched and how important they are. What has been the reception of the diplomatic community? Have you found, you mentioned the UK ambassador, you mentioned the permanent representative from Panama, but have you found more and more interest, more and more of the 193 delegations that want to get on board and participate?
Yes, absolutely. I will say I spent my first couple of months in this job actively meeting our key constituents within the UN headquarters and at different permanent missions, and they were hungry for this connection with New York City. That really is the basis in terms of why we launched the programs that we have. Whether it's Global Vision Urban Action, New York City Junior Ambassadors, we have another programming platform called Connecting Local to Global. We recently did a reception that both ambassadors, UN staff, and the consuls general came to the City Museum of New York, where there is a once-in-a-lifetime exhibit on on New York City's history. And so there are many ways in which we proactively connect with the UN community, and we have really felt that connection. One of my colleagues was just telling me that a new ambassador that has just been accredited direct messaged our Twitter page and said that he's really excited about the Junior Ambassador Program and he can't wait to participate in this coming year. So there is a lot of good reception in terms of that kind of partnership.
Mm-hmm. And of course, all of these programs we're talking about, projects, are on your www.nyc.gov/international, and our viewers can go to that. Do you find, now this is within New York City, the 5 boroughs of New York City. Do you find that other folks from around the country, say perhaps youth in Peoria, Illinois, or youth in Oaxaca, Mexico, or youth in Ottawa, Canada, are they able to use this or to tap into this and maybe get ideas on things they could do in their own communities, even though they don't have the United Nations in their particular town?
Absolutely. The Junior Ambassador Program has its own individual website that we're constantly updating with content, but our biggest focus is to get young people in New York City, but recognizing that there are kids youth around the world that are interested, understanding global goals, how New York City is looking to achieve them, and then ways in which they can activate in their community.
Which is very, very important. One other thing that's always fascinated me, along with what the UN does and how it's so comprehensive today. The UN of 1945 did not deal with the issues that are being dealt with today. They dealt with some of them: peace and security, human rights, economic and social development, but certainly not Ebola, certainly not climate change, and so many of the really pressing issues of today. But I'm curious, you have these high-level dignitaries coming to New York, and they come year-round, but especially in September of every year for the United Nations General Assembly. Tell us, what is that like? How do you deal with that, preparing for these high-level dignitaries?
It's a busy time. One's weekend is not yours. It's a lot of preparation. My team works very closely with, the security agencies that you would, of course, imagine are involved, but also city agencies like Department of Sanitation, Department of Transportation. It is a lot of moving pieces that need to get coordinated. We are at the heart of that coordination. We've been doing it for many years, but we realize that, this is about good relationships. This is about how we collaborate between the UN community and New York City agencies, and so it's an extraordinarily busy time. But we have been doing this for many years, and I think it's going well, and we're very excited about hosting the the 72nd UN General Assembly.
Now, you mentioned the other agencies, and this is something they sometimes, I guess, get forgotten in the shuffle, perhaps not by you, but by us, the general public. But you have the protective service, you have the services, protective services, police, fire, what have you. You also have other groups, housing groups, whatever. Do you do orientation sessions for them, or do you do some type of overview of
around the UN?
Around the UN, or dealing with the international community?
Absolutely. So related to the UN General Assembly, the coordination is bringing people together around orientation about how to prepare for coming up. Now, when it comes to, we deal very closely with the Chief Medical Examiner, for example, or ACS, our Children's Services agency. We are actively in touch with them about how you deal in terms of issues related to diplomatic immunities and privileges. So we are in touch with our city agencies that deal with the diplomatic corps and work proactively with them so that they're aware of the very unique sort of scenario it is being the host to the largest diplomatic corps.
At some point, you'll have to write a book. You get involved in so many different activities, that's for sure. You've met literally dozens, scores, perhaps hundreds, perhaps thousands, I don't know, of high-level dignitaries from around the world. You've been involved with helping to arrange various diplomatic functions. What are one or two of the most memorable events of certainly a multitude that you can probably think of?
Yeah, so something that has been very important to the mayor and I in developing this office and in the role is to ensure that every country feels welcome, right? So this is not, whenever a new ambassador is accredited, we reach out and we sit down and we let them know about what services our office has to offer and what programming opportunities. And so there are hundreds of incredible meetings. Everybody has very specific issue area interests that are fascinating for us to think about how we can partner with. But I will say, and I talked about this earlier, the moment when the Sustainable Development Goals came together, it was when Pope Francis was here. That was an incredible moment at the General Assembly when he gave his remarks. But when the global community signed on, I personally didn't know what was going to happen, and it was a party inside the General Assembly. And I just sort of had my high school nerd hat on, and I was really excited. There were literally lights, like party disco lights going on. It was just one of those really surreal moments for me. I'm very excited. We had an extraordinary relationship with Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, the mayor and I, and we, with the UN General Assembly around the corner, we just had Secretary General Guterres at City Hall last week, and it was fascinating. I had the opportunity to work with him when I was at the Clinton Global Initiative when he was head of UNHCR, and I've always been a very big fan of his. So to now have him at the helm of this incredible institution, that was an extraordinary moment and meeting for me too.
And the Sustainable Development Goals were absolutely monumental.
Absolutely.
Certainly, because that was September of 2015, I believe.
Yes,
they were adopted
it was.
by the 193 member states of the United Nations General Assembly.
Yes.
And they are to, over the next 15 years, to hopefully eradicate poverty, to eliminate hunger, to empower women, to promote sustainable development. These are 17 logical, practical goals that literally hundreds of millions of people around the world and millions of organizations, service clubs, Rotary International, Lions International, not to say they're working all 17 of them, but certainly some of them, they're working to achieve. But that had to be so moving. And I see you have a pin.
I
look across here.
I have a pin, and I'm very proud to wear it. Something that is very important to us around the Sustainable Development Goals is that it gets to the shared values, the heart of why New York City, this administration, is so proud to have the UN here, and why we need to focus on what that sharing of best practices. Now more than ever, cities are more important than ever. I think this is an opportunity for New York City to share with the global community what American values look like, whether it's on climate change. So very recently, the mayor signed our commitment to the Paris Accords and our focus on climate action, or how we, protect our immigrants. And this has been a real focus on how we connect the SDGs, our values here in New York City, and really reinforce that commitment. And again, starting at the cities, whenever I talk to any UN leadership, we all agree that the SDGs came together at the highest level, but the activation needs to happen in the community, and New York City is really proud to be leading on that.
And the whole issue of climate change is so critical, and given, especially since the U.S. national government is not participating as actively in the Paris Agreement, but the cities and the states around, not only the United States, but around the world, are moving forward on this. They're taking it very seriously, and they realize that climate change is here, it's happening, and it's going to be more detrimental. If we don't deal with it today, it'll be more detrimental tomorrow. But the cities are just absolutely invaluable, because what is something by 2050, 75% of all the people on the planet will be living in cities?
That's exactly right. And I'm proud to say that over 300 U.S. cities signed on and did their versions of executive orders after the federal government pulled out of the Paris Accord.
Well, in the last minute or so we have left, the hardest question, what do you see as the biggest challenge confronting your office and perhaps the international community or the UN as we move forward?
Oh, that's a loaded question, Bill. I will say for my job in particular, diplomatic incidents are always a challenge, right? I absolutely believe in the integrity of diplomatic privileges and immunities, but there are certain issues that we have to grapple with here that are challenging. For the global community, I think really it is about how we work together, and this is why cities become at the heart of this challenge, right? Their, governments are constantly shifting. The winds are going in lots of different ways right now. And when I look at the current political climate, it is now more than ever that I feel like New York City needs to show up. And this is an extraordinary opportunity to be leading this office and leading this relationship with the UN and the global community. It is extraordinarily important that we are communicating to the global community the shared values we have with them and what American values look like in practice here in New York City.
That's very true. And again, our viewers can go to your website at www.nyc.gov/international and learn a lot more about the programs you've been talking about. But it is absolutely critical that we work on these problems together, because no one country, no one region, no one grouping of countries, come right down to it, can solve these problems, and especially when it comes to climate change and even war and peace. You have to have cooperation. And you can't do it through some type of bilateral relationship, even though those can be valuable at certain points in time. But Commissioner Penny Abeywardena, I want to thank you so very much for a very interesting and a very informative program.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. My pleasure. I'm Bill Miller. Thank you for joining us today on Global Connections Television.